Hi, I'm MrMostDaysOff. You might remember me from such podcasts as the 50th Podcast Celebration Show and the Michael Price interview. I've brought a friend along today to talk to you about an exciting new product.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Richie the WizKid.
Miles, did you know that most people have no idea how to get a Best Darn Diddly t-shirt?
You can get a t-shirt with a podcast logo on it?
Well, if you go to tpublic.com/bestdarndiddly, you'll find not only shirts, but also Best Darn Diddly hoodies, posters, mugs, and even phone and laptop cases. It's like they'll put their name on anything.
Help support the Best Darn Diddly Review Show by purchasing any of the crap we put our name on at tpublic.com/bestdarndiddly.
Bye, everybody.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. This is a weekly podcast for anyone who loves The Simpsons or ever has loved The Simpsons, hosted by two dudes that grew up on The Simpsons. My name is Miles, better known as MrMostDaysOff, and today we are expanding our Brotherhood of Vigilantes. We've got a special guest on the show joining us to discuss the episode Homer the Vigilante. But first, joining me as always, your co-host with the most, Richie the WizKid. How you doing today, Rich?
I'm excited, man. This is a really fun episode with a really fun guest as well, because I think this is around the time Jurassic Park came out. So I believe I actually knew who this guy was when I heard his voice on the show. But as always, we'll get into that. So let me go ahead and throw it back to you, the man, the myth, the Malloy. It is Miles.
Very cool. Yeah, it is a very cool guest star on the Simpsons episode, and we've got a guest on our podcast today. He's a actor, a writer, a producer. He basically just makes movies. That's what this guy does. His name is Danny Mac, and he has the movie Heel Kick for you wrestling fans and just comedy fans alike coming out very, very soon. Welcome to the show, Danny. How are you today, sir?
I'm great. I'm excited to talk Simpsons and a little bit of Heel Kick. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. So, what we always do here on the show before we do anything else, we like to start by asking you, what is your connection to The Simpsons?
Well, I grew up watching The Simpsons as well. I'm sort of a 90s kid. And it was much like my love for Saturday Night Live. I wouldn't understand all of the material until I grew up and got a little bit older, but that just gave me sort of something to look forward to. And I think a show is really special when it affects you in that way, when you know there's some elements that you're just not getting because you're a little too young, because you're able to revisit them, and then it's like the same episode, so you get the nostalgia factor, but you also get to understand these jokes for the first time, so it's like a brand new experience all in one.
Wow, brother, that is so in tune with what our whole podcast is all about, because that's essentially what we experience on a weekly basis here on the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. Richie and I were both born in 1985, so we both, it was in the era where it was a cartoon, so our parents really didn't know any better not to have us not watch it, even though there are clearly some adult jokes in there that slip through every once in a while. But like you mentioned, the beauty of the show is you don't really, they're not so raunchy that if you watch it as a kid, you still enjoy it, and then you come back, years or even decades later in this case, and you get to experience it with a whole new set of life experience.
It's so true, yeah. You go from being a kid and thinking that it's the slapstick humor is the best and Bart might be the funniest character, till you grow up a little bit and then you realize you recognize the satire element and the political commentary. And just that Homer might be the funniest written character in the history of comedy, and everything changes, but it stays the same. It's very cool.
Absolutely, and yeah, I definitely don't disagree with you that Homer is easily one of the greatest characters in history, not even of just television, but across all media. I would say, he's brilliant.
Very true. All of fiction, yeah.
So we are absolutely going to get back to The Simpsons, because after all, that is what this podcast is all about. However, I myself am a big, big wrestling fan. In fact, our show originally was started on a wrestling network, and we were kind of the obscure stepchild of the network doing the Simpsons things. But we discovered that The Simpsons has a crossover fandom with almost everything else. Essentially, if you make a Venn diagram and one of your circles is the Simpsons, your middle section, no matter what that other circle is going to be significant. There's a lot of crossover. So we actually do have a lot of our listeners who are also wrestling fans. And I've seen the preview now of Heel Kick a bunch, and I'm very excited, but why don't you put it out there? You're going to be able to say it a lot better than we can. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about Heel Kick and what that's all about?
Okay, well, Heel Kick is a mockumentary about two backyard wrestlers, two wrestling fans, really, that have been talking about becoming professional wrestlers for the better part of 10 or 15 years. And this movie begins when we actually see them start their training for the first time. But they are untalented, uncharismatic, and they just suck.
So like a lot of backyard wrestlers in the 90s.
Exactly. Yes, just like a lot of backyard wrestlers. Exactly.
That's awesome.
I thought I heard an interview that you were doing where you actually said you did the training but didn't tell them that you were doing a movie for a while, so that they actually were treating you like real backyard wrestlers trying to become professionals.
That is true. Yeah, we tried to keep that as under wraps as possible. Probably 3 or 4 months into training, everyone found out. You form a bond with the people you're training with after a while, and become Facebook friends or whatever. And then it's like, hey, you're an actor. You're making a movie about pro wrestling. Is that why you're here? And you can just go, no.
I was actually going to ask if you did that in character as Reggie or if you did that as yourself, Danny Mac.
I had to be training as myself and not in character, or I would have just been. I would have got my ass kicked out of there so fast.
Outed immediately.
Yeah, he's a bit too much of a preposterous, confrontational idiot.
I thought you might take it to some like Andy Kaufman type of levels, where you just keep the joke going longer than anybody else really wants it to until it comes back around again.
When we were shooting, I would rarely drift out of character, even when I was telling people how I wanted them to treat me. But it was weird because all the trainers that had trained me in real life, I knew, so those were the ones that I wanted in the film. And when I would be like, okay, let's relive when you taught us to run the ropes. And they would say, you weren't that good when you first, they would have to remind us of how bad we actually were.
Do that again, only worse.
To slip into character. Yeah, that's right. You guys are much crappier when you first started out. But no, we kept it a secret as long as we could. Only a couple people knew at the start that we were doing it for the purposes of a film. Because we didn't want them to go easier on us per se. We didn't want an actor's version of pro wrestling school. So we trained for about 6 months. And by the time everyone was wise to what we were doing, we had already been treated a certain way and formed a rapport with everyone at the gym. So things carried on as usual.
Oh, that's really cool, actually. I also heard that, I can't remember now if it was a sibling or maybe a cousin that you had that actually attended Lance Storm's wrestling school. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. My older cousin, me and him, we grew up loving wrestling together, and I grew out of it, I would say. I'd still had interest in the industry, but, I wasn't consuming the products anymore, watching the content. He was still up to date on everything, but his interests had turned to, wanting to do it himself, which I didn't blame him for. He was, he seemed to have all the ingredients to be successful in the pro wrestling industry. But he did go to the Lance Storm school, and he did quit after a week or two, maybe not even that long. And I was, intrigued to hear why it was different than he thought, and why it wasn't for him ultimately. But the part that really stuck with me is when he would tell me about the other kids in class, because my cousin, he's really fit. He's 6'3", probably 200 pounds, and 220, really well spoken. And then he would tell me about the other kids in the class who, he's like, these guys are delusional. Like, they don't even exercise. They have no chance. And he wasn't picking on them. He was just, he was just being factual. Like, these guys have no hope. And I thought, man, it would be funny to follow two guys like that on their journey to be pro wrestlers. And then so that was the impetus of the idea way back, whenever that was.
Well, I love that you're doing it in the mockumentary style. I personally love that genre. Going back, I know you listed one of your inspirations for the film is Spinal Tap, which also has a lot of crossover with The Simpsons, of course.
That's right.
And I love that movie as well. And then even more recently, going back to even probably Borat would be one of them. That's pretty old. I'm dating myself, but even that came out at least within the last couple decades. And that style in general just always is good for a laugh. And I think personally, now I'm biased because I'm a wrestling fan, but I see this film as having crossover appeal, being even better than something like if you saw the movie Ready to Rumble, which painted wrestling fans not in the greatest light. In all honesty, if we look back on that film, this actually looks like it's really funny, but also is treating the wrestling business with respect. And then at the same time, being able to reach out to somebody like Richie, who thinks wrestling is the dumbest thing in the world, but he got several laughs from just the short trailer you have available on your website right now.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that came through. That was one of our mission statements. I did not want to make a film that was disrespectful of pro wrestling for the pro wrestling community. It didn't make sense to me. And you mentioned Ready to Rumble, and that's funny because that movie came out at one of the peaks of my love for wrestling. And I remember the itches that movie did not scratch for me. Maybe not specifically, but just, I still have that feeling of like, oh, that's too bad. We finally got a wrestling movie and it's not what I really wanted. And I think a lot of wrestling fans all say the same thing, just like, you've only got one sibling and they're kind of a jackass, but they're your only sibling. That's how people kind of talk about Ready to Rumble.
Oh, no, it's sitting on my shelf right now, but every time I watch it, it's exactly like you just described. It's like, well, I'm glad we have this, but this really?
Yeah, but does it have to be this?
Right.
So
right.
That's how I feel about Miles all the time.
I get
if
that
there
a lot.
was anything else or anyone else, you would swap. Yeah. So I sort of made the wrestling movie that I wish existed, with a combination of my tastes today. And the mockumentary element, makes for a really good, intimate storytelling experience. And I didn't want to do something where, two regular guys become, they're in a match against Goldberg and Sting at the end. This is just a little movie about what would really happen if two people in a fish out of water situation, wrestling fans, decided to start training. And what happens is you find a local promotion, you join the gym. They let you know if you're going to be worth their time or not. I mean, some of them will just take your money no matter what. And then you go from there. You try to get booked in their shows, and then you try to get some eyeballs on you. So, the realistic approach was really, that's the most interesting part to me.
Very cool.
Although if they did end up fighting Goldberg and Sting at the end and getting their asses kicked, that would be quite funny, I would think.
Yeah.
Especially after you just said that on here, and you're like, yeah, that's totally not going to be the ending we go with.
Wink, wink.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil anything.
No, not at all. Heel kick looks fantastic. I cannot say heel kick, brother. That's a tough thing to do.
It's a tricky one.
Heel Kick releases on January 19th. You can find that at heelkickmovie.com. If you're listening to this podcast when it drops new, which is on the 14th, that's going to be this coming Friday. Show's available on iTunes and video on demand. Is there anywhere else that you want to plug to make sure that everybody can find your movie?
I think that's pretty much it. The pre-orders could be up at that point, so try locking in a pre-order, save yourself a couple bucks. But otherwise, yeah, I would love for people to check out the film when it comes out next month. Well, pardon me, when it comes out in a couple days.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's weird doing it this way. We do that all the time. But yeah, definitely check out the movie. Richie and I are going to check it out for certain, and we'll definitely be talking about it, probably both on the podcast and on Twitter. With all of the people that enjoy talking about wrestling, or like I said, even if you're not a wrestling fan, if you just like comedies, I really think this is going to have a good amount of crossover appeal, because let's be honest, all of us who watched and enjoyed Spinal Tap didn't necessarily get super into heavy metal in the 60s or 70s or whenever it was.
Exactly. And I think pro wrestling, to end on this note, is one of those things that either you're a fan of pro wrestling and you're dragging your non-wrestling friends to an event just to hang out, or you're the friend who got dragged to the event. There's a lot of not wrestling fans at wrestling events all the time. And I promise you don't have to know a thing about pro wrestling or like it or even respect it to enjoy this movie. And you might get a little bit of an education process on the business as well.
I'm sold.
Yeah, he's in. I know, Richie. You know what? He talks a lot of shit about wrestling, but he was here at my house when I first showed him the trailer for your movie, and he had a couple. He will purposely try to like no sell, like he's sitting there, trying to be like, oh, this shit's not funny. It's about wrestling. But I think it was your there was one of the lines that your character says in the movie that he actually like busted a smirk on his face and couldn't help himself. I can't remember what it was now. Richie,
we're in the Milky Way universe.
Or the Milky Way galaxy. This galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy.
Yeah. The Milky Way
I think you said universe on that.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah.
You fucked it up.
Oh, see, there, I missed it.
And I like that you wrote it, produced it, directed it, started it. Like, I thought putting all that work into it, it made me appreciate you in the trailer a lot more. I watched an interview of you first before I watched the trailer. So then I'd know who you were in the trailer. And I was like, oh, you're the lead. This is awesome. Okay.
Yeah, when you've got a vision for something and you want to make it happen, sometimes you have to wear many hats. So I'll gladly spread out the workload next time if that is an option.
So if you had to pick, I'm looking at your IMDb page now, and it has you listed out for acting, directing, writing, producing, editing. If you had to pick one of those hats, what would you say is your absolute favorite when you're working on a film?
I oscillate between acting and writing a lot in my career of just what I get the most enjoyment from. Obviously, as an actor, you're always out of work, and then you book something, and then you're out of work again until you book something else. So you should really be writing in your free time or doing something else creative. And to me, they always went hand in hand, because when I was growing up, I was really into creative writing, but then the most satisfying part was performing after, reading the stories aloud and making them come to life. So I always found the two to be synonymous with one another. But I can't tell you if I write just so I can act, or I act so that I can get to read the things that I wrote. But it's definitely those are my two biggest passions.
That's really cool. And then totally off the wall question, just because I happen to be a fan of this show as well. I know that you were a DEA officer on the show Bates Motel for an episode. I love that show. I don't know if you were actually watching it or if you just got to act in it, but do you have any fun stories or fun experiences from your time working on Bates Motel?
First of all, that show is so cool to be a part of. That is like high art. There's a lot of TV shows out there, but how many are really quite astounding. It's
on a different level, dude. Yeah, it's really
the acting, the cinematography, and it's just really a really amazing product. But that day, I had to borrow my friend's car to get to set, which was out of town. I live here in Vancouver, and tons of shows are shot here. But I had to borrow my friend's car to drive out of town to this little airport where they shot that scene. And it was just the worst 5 a.m. storm that I could imagine. The sun wasn't up yet, and I could barely see. I was like, I'm going to die on the way to this friggin' thing. Like, there's no way I'm going to make it. I did make it, and I was just thanking my lucky stars I was okay. I got a bit of breakfast from the food truck before we started, but this is before I knew that I had some food allergies that I would discover a few months later.
No.
So I was eating all these things that I would later find out, like, my body hates and doesn't digest properly. So I'm on set, and I begin to just get, like, real anxiety. And I'm like, oh, I must just be excited for my scene. But then it starts really building, and I'm like, am I going to, like, pass out or throw up? Like, what the hell is wrong with me right now? This is way too intense. And then I just had no idea that, I'd be like, I need to just eat something and calm down. So I would just keep essentially poisoning myself and wondering what the hell was going on. So looking back, I was like, no wonder I felt like complete shit and I was in the worst agony of all time. But that was just in retrospect. I like to bring my own lunch now.
So if you're a fan of Bates Motel and you're watching the episode Unfaithful and you notice a queasy looking secure or DEA officer, and you know why that is.
I used it. It helped me purse my lips and be a more pitch.
That's right. Yeah, that's acting, damn it.
That's right.
Good for you, brother. Good for you. That's awesome. Well, Let's go ahead and dive into our episode today. As I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to be discussing Homer the Vigilante, which originally aired on January 6, 1994, which is in fact the very first episode of 94. So Happy New Year, everyone, both here on the show and in case you missed us last week, because we're about 2 weeks into January now. So on to a brand new year of the show. Always fun to see where we're going to go from here. So far, Season 5 has been awesome, and this episode is no different. Our chalkboard gag is, I am not authorized to fire substitute teachers. Damn it, that's a dream as a child, isn't it?
I mean, you screw with them enough when you get a substitute teacher. You might as well have authority to fire them, right?
You really, dude, half the time with substitutes in like middle school and high school, they would just be somebody who graduated like a year before, so they didn't give a fuck. You didn't give a fuck. Those are just the best days.
Or they'd be your friends' mothers, and they would call on you in class being like, Richie, where did you guys lead off last time? And it's like, oh, and everyone's looking at you.
Nerd.
Yeah, you can either lie for the class, or you can pick up where the game plan left off. But
the teacher said this was going to be a board game day.
Right.
We did that quite a few times in Spanish in high school, where they'd be like, where did you guys stop watching The Road to El Dorado? And we'd be like, we didn't even start it. And the substitute would be like, oh, okay, and start it from the beginning.
Wow.
Perfect.
We also get another repeat couch gag, and I believe this is another one that they used from the season opener Barbershop Quartet, where they had 3 in 1. This one, it's all the Simpsons run into each other, collide, and explode. And my favorite part is like a couple second delay, and then you see Maggie's pacifier fall to the floor, which is actually really grim if you think about it, but a really funny couch gag nonetheless.
I think that's proof that she survived.
Magical Maggie, for sure, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We open the episode up with a very peaceful night in Springfield. All seems quiet and well, and nothing's amuck until we see a shadowy figure appear in the front yard. And I actually really love it. It gets this like real jazzy, like Pink Panther style of music playing as this burglar comes up to the door. He's got a really fancy set of lock-picking tools that he won't need it all because Homer left his keys in the doorknob.
But you can tell that they locked the door still.
I got my first laugh of the episode there, and that's like 15 to 20 seconds in, and that's, just something
with no dialogue.
No dialogue. Yeah.
And to your point earlier, just goes to add layers to the great character that Homer is, because he's making, buffoon-like mistakes that, to be fair, all of us have done that at some point, or at least I have. Hopefully I didn't just out myself in that type of situation, but I'm pretty sure most of us have left our keys in the door at some point, gone looking for them, frantic the next day, and then you're kind of like, smack your forehead because you're an idiot when you find them.
Yeah, that's just default Homer. The thing that we might do once a year. I noticed in this episode that I was trying to keep my eyes peeled just for the entire staff, and then Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein are credited as some sort of producers on the episode, and they went on to make a show called Mission Hill, which was one of the many like Adult Swim before it was Adult Swim shows.
I remember advertisements for that.
Yeah, it was one of these shows that were only one season long. For some reason, even though they were beloved by people, and there's a bunch of those shows. I think Undergrads, Clone High, Oblongs, whatever. But
Mission
you just
listed a bunch of good shows.
was so good, and it felt like the evolution of The Simpsons. And I was so crushed to find out that there weren't new episodes of that show. So it was cool to see Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein's names pop up here.
It's really neat when you start watching The Simpsons a lot. Like, we watch an episode every week, so we see a lot of the same names pop up over and over again. And then, to your point, you go and you watch some of your favorite shows now, and it's amazing how many Simpsons writers are still a part of different shows that are a part of our culture now. We, not too long ago, had Simpsons writer Michael Price on the show, who now does the show F is for Family on Netflix, which is fantastic. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's really good. And he has actually, we're excited to be having him on again here in January. We'll be having him back on the show, so that won't release till sometime in February.
That's very cool. Yeah, and that is a good show, the Bill Burr animated series, and it's I mean, these guys are so funny. Like, what else are they gonna do? Like, it would just be a waste if they weren't still working on something.
Exactly. Yeah, and they do a great job, and it's fun to see them kind of explore outside of the rules of the Simpsons or the world of the Simpsons. They get to kind of go and show off some of the other parts of their creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And then you add someone like Bill Burr, who's just an amazing comedian. So that was just a recipe for success right there in general. And
I believe so.
This thief has a recipe for success because he knows what he is
Oh, I
doing.
see what you did there.
You like that? Segue. We have him coming in with a bunch of, I think he had like a handful of sausages for Santa's little helper, which...
Were they really for him from the get-go?
They worked for Homer as well, to be fair.
So not dumber than a dog, but maybe as dumb as.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. Homer's still like asleep, and he just kind of in his sleep chews on the sausages. It totally works. Lisa sleeps with her saxophone, we discover, because as she, I guess, it sounds almost like she's snoring, but like playing a sax instead of a like snoozing sound. And then the thief just replaces her sax with a kazoo, which somehow works, but hey, it does the job. That's all that matters.
I like how loud the kazoo is.
Yeah. I just hope for all that trouble.
Making music, it's still fun.
She's still on beat too. Yeah.
What if he would have given her a jug right there? Then what would Homer buy her in the next scene?
Whoop, 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 whoop.
That's right.
I just hope that saxophone that Lisa has didn't come from Sears, because then it's totally not worth stealing. I love, too, with Bart. Bart is sleeping while clutching his little portable television, which is just great. That's a very Simpsons thing to do in general. But the way that the thief tricks him is by replacing his television with a book that I guess could be about the same weight, but it's even better than that because the book is titled Coping with Loss.
He thought this through.
He really did. He's a very smart man, we'll discover through the rest of the episode. He's even able to sneak in and steal Marge's red pearl necklace, which has actually been on her so long it's made little indentions in her neck. And they kind of like make this suctioning sound as she pulls or as he pulls them off of her neck.
The pop noise, yes, it was satisfying to hear.
It was like a bubble wrap type of sensation or sound. And as the thief exits the house, you can see Homer and Santa's little helper are happily asleep at the bottom of the stairs, still chewing on their meat. Unfortunately, the next day they are awoken to a very distraught family who has realized that they've been robbed, and Marge is upset, of course, about her heirloom pearls, even though she has an entire drawer of them. But they're all heirlooms. And an even bigger reveal, Bart comes downstairs and announces, "The burglar even took my stamp collection."
You have a stamp collection?
The family literally point and laugh in his face, and it is one of the funniest moments of the episode.
It's so mean, but so funny. And then the cherry is, of course, Nelson calls. Somehow, telepathically just knows that there's a moment that he is needed for. Ha ha!
Stamp collection. Ha ha!
So, Lisa is upset more than Bart, of course, because while Bart's misery is kind of funny, hers is serious. The saxophone was the only way she had to truly express herself, which, to be fair, after our conversation with Carolyn Omine, who pointed out that Lisa often represents the writers themselves in the episode, a lot of times they use her to actually express some of their experiences and some of their thoughts and feelings, essentially. I think that actually has more significance and more meaning watching it this time than it ever has before, because I think in a lot of ways, while that's a really funny line and it just seems kind of selfish in a Simpsons fashion, at the same time, it truly is because of her plight of being, you know, the only Simpson that accepts how smart she is and is therefore miserable. That saxophone is the only time she feels anything other than sorrow, essentially.
Well, and the line is punctuated even better when Homer retorts with, "Shh, quiet, Lisa."
Yeah.
Yeah, moments like that are so necessary in the show and in these seasons to give you something legitimate to root for. They all just pointed and laughed in their child's face for losing a stamp collection. But
And shush the other one.
you need something to hang on to, and Homer fighting for Lisa sort of never really gets old. It's used a lot in the series, but you believe it, right? This buffoon would want to just try and keep her happy, because sort of the best thing he's ever done is just simply have her as a daughter. So yeah, it totally reads, I think.
And again, the voice acting is always really, really well done with both Dan Castellaneta and Yeardley Smith, and together they often have some of the more heartfelt moments. So when you see Homer treat her like this, it even raises the bar yet again to put that even more over the top. Is just a really funny thing to say to a child.
Mm-hmm. Well, when he acts that way to Lisa, it sets up the redemption of Homer, which you're always going to get later, which I think is the most touching parts.
True. After all, all of this is supposedly because he's out to get her saxophone back, or will be here soon. For now, though, Bart's actually noticed that the burglar left an actual calling card, and it says, "You've been robbed by the Springfield cat burglar." And then we get a visit from Homer's favorite neighbor, Ned Flanders.
Hidely ho, neighborinos.
Can't talk. Robbed. Go hell.
You folks got robbed too? The burglar took my shroud of, what did he say? My shroud of Turin beach towels.
Wow, it's a crime wave.
I think one quick moment that we missed is when the calling card is discovered and Marge gives a hilarious line reading of, "Oh yes, cute." Not quite sure. Like, she's offended, but it is legitimately gentlemanly, so she can't deny it. But that's just a great. That delivery is amazing.
It really is, and it sets up for later too, when he's all so charming with his apologies that the town just is going to want to let him go free.
Spoiler alert.
Oh, yes. I assume you've seen this episode at this point. Sorry.
I mean, it is from 1994, so that's not that long ago, right?
True. Only over 2 decades. It is my fault. I
might as well
why I made the mistake.
Tell everyone who Ray's parents are while we're at it. While we're rooting stuff for people.
That's right. Yeah. Bunch of nobodies.
He means us.
Yeah. Disney's not going to come after us for this or anything.
Well, they technically own The Simpsons, which I think might mean they own us now. I really don't know how that works. If Mickey comes a calling, I'm probably just going to bow down to the master, because I know I have to accept my fate at that point. Oh, God, that's creepy. Bart was not wrong when he said that it was a crime wave. It's not just in the Simpsons home, it's all over Springfield, because, for one, Principal Skinner wakes up and finds out that his Stormin' Norman commemorative plates are missing. And one of my favorite little gags in the whole episode is Barney wakes up in his apartment completely naked, and his apartment is also completely empty, and I do mean bare, as if you were just to move into it. And he essentially wakes up and says, "Hey, I thought I had more stuff than this."
Oh, Barney.
That's the perfect old Barney.
Back-to-back 2 people to rob. Just the consummate nerd, Skinner, and then you get Barney, just the waste case, who isn't even quite sure if he got robbed to begin with. But yeah.
That's the thing, is I don't really know that Barney would have had anything worth stealing. So if anything, maybe it was just like a cleaning crew, or possibly even his apartment was just like, okay, this apartment is a waste zone. Like, we're just throwing it all away.
It was a bit Barney is being a hoarder, honestly. So he probably does have some stuff.
It reminded me of a bit of a I had mustard moment kind of there with Barney, not knowing how little he has.
That's a meal.
Aww.
As the several Springfield residents are, going over their missing stuff, we're back at the Simpsons home, and Lisa is like, "Hey, everything's fine because we have insurance, right?" So Marge tells Homer to tell her child what happened when she told him to go pay the insurance.
Curse you, magic beans!
We see that there's actually a jar on the counter that says magic beans, and it's heavily implied that that insurance check never got to the rightful insurance agent.
Amazing.
They decide they're going to call the cops and report the robbery to Wiggum, but Wiggum has basically overwhelmed. He's got a pinboard full of places that have been robbed at this point, and he doesn't really see a pattern. But then Wiggum notices if he moves this pin here, and that pin here, and this pin there, and he basically just starts moving pins around randomly until he notices that it looks like an arrow, and it's pointing right at the police station.
Let's get out of here.
Ah!
Wiggum running.
There was a
away
lot
from
of
the
really good
police
Wiggum
station.
moments.
There are. He has my favorite line of the entire episode, actually.
I think
which
me too.
We'll
yeah,
get
yeah.
to later.
Yeah, I think we're all going to agree on that.
Good to know we're on the same page.
Yeah. So we get the first of what we're going to get many sequences of throughout this episode. There's actually a newspaper that spins onto the screen. This one has a headline that says, "Cat burglar strikes 15 homes." And then down at the bottom it says, "Man marries woman in wedding ceremony." Which...
Slow news day, you might say.
Yeah. I used to love that, though. At this time in the 90s, this would have been, like I said, right early 94. It was not uncommon at all on those tabloid magazines that you would see in the grocery aisle. Of various times you'd see things of man marries dishwasher, or woman marries goldfish, things like that were just absurd, and I'm sure have actually happened over the course of time, but not nearly as many times as these tabloid magazines would have you to believe.
Yeah, do you think this is a bit of a jab at the wackiness of those, and the joke here is that the most ordinary thing ever has happened and it's newsworthy?
For now, though, we see that Kent Brockman is doing a special TV news report, and he actually has a professor on as a guest. He says, "When cat burglaries start, can mass murders be far behind? This reporter isn't saying that the burglar is an inhuman monster like the Wolfman, but he very well could be." So, Professor, would you say it's time for everyone to panic?
Yes, I would, Kent.
I love this too. This just like the last newspaper parody. This is such a great parody of the ridiculous hype they call for on network news, essentially, where they will try to make every story and blow it wide out of proportion.
And this is a great callback joke in the episode. There's three really strong ones. There's this one, of course, the newspaper bit. And my favorite callback joke of the episode is the really strong Professor Frink bit with the
yes.
with the house that runs away and then crashes and burns. And then, of course, we see someone has actually purchased this defense mechanism, and their fiery fate awaits them as well.
I just want to know what happens if someone breaks into your house and the house gets up and runs away. Isn't the burglar still with you?
Yeah, it's almost like his getaway is planned during the robbery.
As long as he's okay being on fire.
I had a note on that scene that I also noted that I really liked it, for one, but I also had, because of the way that Frink did the presentation, where he said, of course, in real life, the real Hermans wouldn't quite burn so fast, implying they would die slower. And David Mirkin, the showrunner in season 5, is known for his dark sense of humor. So I really did half expect when the real house fell over and started burning, I kind of thought we were going to hear humans screaming "Oh, why aren't we dying faster?" or something like that.
I'm slowly burning to death.
Yeah, exactly. I guess they thought that would be crossing the line just a little bit.
That's something we should ask David sometime.
Yeah, that's right. We need to get him on the show next. That's going to be a good time. We also did talk about a major break in the case that Wiggum announces, where they have found the burglar's handkerchief from one of his crime scenes, and all they have to do is let a tracking dog get a good sniff of it and find that scent, and they're going to be able to hunt him down. Unfortunately, though, I guess the public speaking made Wiggum a little bit nervous because he started to perspire quite a bit. So he wiped his own sweat with the handkerchief before letting the dog smell it. And of course, he gives the kill command, and it immediately jumps at his throats.
This is one of those great bits where like they spend so much time on the setup, like the way Norm Macdonald would tell a joke, that you already know what the punchline is going to be, and you're just anticipating the stupidness, and it makes it all the more delightful. I don't know how that works. It's like they ruin the joke with the setup, and it makes it just funnier.
That is a really interesting comparison. This joke is very similar to a Norm Macdonald joke. I did not make that connection on my own, though. That's a really interesting observation. And you're totally right. It absolutely, they purposely kill their own joke in a lot of ways, but their delivery is so great that you can't help but laugh the entire time, as opposed to just laughing at the punchline.
I mean, you got to be such an expert joke writer to get to the point where you are making a decision to like kill the joke before you get to the punchline, just out of, I don't know, like they're just reinventing the way to make us laugh. It was so funny. It was so good.
Well, it's kind of
they always add that little extra spot on it too. Like in this one, he's literally being like ripped apart, but he even has the time to say, "Are there any questions?" So they always find that little extra part to make it just a little bit sweeter after you think the joke's already over too.
That's a great button. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. So the whole town is getting. We then get to the Frink scene that we talked about, and that kind of leads to the whole town going into security panic, if you will. So Bart's walking down the street. That's when we actually see the real life house get legs and run away, just like the model that Frink demonstrated in the scene before. And then as Bart continues to walk down the street, he also sees things like automatic bars going over windows. And one house even has a high-tech security system that shoots lasers at anything that approaches. So all the people in town, or all the kids in town, start throwing rocks, and they really enjoy just having the lasers light everything up.
Is this Simpsons did it with the Purge security system?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. For now, though, I love this bit with Jasper. This is contender for one of my favorite jokes, though I think it does get beat out later. But essentially, Jasper gets shot with one of these lasers that was intended to shoot the rocks or protect the home. And immediately, he's just like, all the colors I can see! And his cataracts are healed, essentially. Only immediately after that, he's hit by another laser and is like, oh well, easy come, easy go.
I'm blind. Oh well, easy come, easy go.
That's a good Jasper.
That was a good Jasper, yeah. So everyone's spooked by this crime wave that's going on, and we actually cut to the Springfield retirement castle where Abe Simpson sees a shadowy figure appear in his door. And immediately, obviously, he thinks it's the burglar because they're all on high alert. But it turns out he's just a little bit paranoid. It's just another resident named Malloy who just wanted to borrow some of Abe's ointment.
Who's got a similar shadow to the one we saw in the opening scene.
Abe's response, though, oh, it's you, Malloy. All right, but this time clean off the applicator.
That's funny gross, looking back. It is a little gross. I think about when I was a kid and I first watched this episode, which is something The Simpsons does really, really well. I can't remember the first time I saw a lot of things, but I feel like I remember where I was when I watched a lot of these classic Simpsons episodes. And it's funny that I didn't know that Malloy was the cat burglar. You know, here's a brand new character with a very smooth guest voice actor voicing him who's never been seen before, who's, you know, walking into the room the same way we see the cat burglar introduced. And I was like, who's this new guy? You know, I don't know. I probably should have read between the lines a little deeper, but it wasn't readily obvious to me that this was the guy.
So 2 things to talk about on that, to your point, is I actually usually agree with you, but I have to be honest, this episode I do not have strong memories of. As I was watching through it, it didn't ring nearly as much of a bell as a lot of the episodes that we've been reviewing lately have, like, Marge on the Lamb or Cape Fear, Homer's Barbershop Quartet, that to me all seem like some of the most iconic episodes of the show. I really enjoyed this episode a lot, but I don't really have nearly as strong... I know I've seen it before, I just didn't really remember it as clearly as a lot of the others. The other thing, you brought up the guest voice actor, and I know Richie has been biting at the bit since we started the podcast to talk about our boy Sam Neill, so let's go ahead and bring up that Malloy is voiced by the brilliant Sam Neill, Australian actor, and of course probably most famous to people our age for his role on Jurassic Park.
I was actually going to say that other movie, the one where he's in space and all the blood's on the ship.
Oh, I love Event Horizon.
Thank
That's
you.
one of my favorite horror movies, even though apparently now that just means I'm like some cliche wannabe or something, even though I've loved that movie since like it came out. Now that's one of the ones that people want to hate you for liking.
Oh, man. My dad took me to see that in theaters and took a bunch of my friends. And a bunch of my friends were like, that was way too much blood. And my dad and I were like, that was awesome.
That's a really fun movie. The other movie I actually really like him in is another horror movie, In the Mouth of Madness, where he essentially is playing an author who kind of gets sucked into his own world, his own fictional universe, and he's a I can't name the name. It's like the monster guy who creates all the
Stephen King.
No, well, kind of actually. There are Stephen King elements, but this is like the more of the like grotesque element monsters. Why am I blanking on this?
Clive Barker.
Clive Barker, yeah, Clive Barker. That might be who I'm thinking of right there. Kind of
or Dean Koontz, or I don't know who you're trying to go with.
It's actually kind of an amalgamation of those authors, essentially, is what it is. But essentially, Sam Neill's character gets sucked into his own fictional universe, and it's a lot of fun. It's a really good movie. But Sam Neill is awesome, and he is really, really awesome in this role on the
He's
Simpsons
very
as
charming
well.
in this role.
He
And
really
it goes
is.
to show you how Simpsons used to, what they used to value in a guest voice appearance in terms of a celebrity, and where people would argue they fell to the wayside in later seasons, and how they're used now or in the last several years.
A lot of people feel like it was way better when celebrities would play fictional, made-up characters for the show as opposed to playing themselves on the show. And there's a very big divide of people online who essentially think that was the real decline of The Simpsons, is when they started having more and more characters who would come on and essentially just spoof themselves, as opposed to something like this, or, we've also seen it many times up to this point. I'm in my mind is popping out Lisa's Substitute, where Dustin Hoffman, came in and played Mr. Bergstrom, and there's been many, many other examples up until this point so far, and it really does. It gives them, it features them in a way, but it doesn't rub it in your face as much. Like, I mean, honestly, if you didn't know that voice and you didn't read the credits, you wouldn't necessarily know it was Sam Neill, but even if you didn't know that, he still does a great job in the role, so you'd still enjoy the episode. And then if you do know that voice, like us, and it is meaningful for you, it makes that role even more memorable and even more special.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, but there've been episodes where we have freaking Johnny Carson on, where Bart's like, I love that guy, with a lot of other voice actors where they can spoof themselves even in the earlier years. So I think that's just a bunch of angry people on the internet just chattering.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, who didn't love Tom Hanks in the movie? It's Mr. Hanks, tussle my hair, when he's talking about blowing up Springfield. Like, it was great.
That's true. No,
And every
you're totally
time
right.
Ron Howard appears as Ron Howard.
Yes.
Gold. Ron Howard has got to be the best recurring plays himself character in the show.
He hates Homer so much.
About a toaster a killer diving instructor that goes back in time for some reason.
I don't know. And he has to choose which one will live and which one will die.
Speaking of people dying, Appu is also on the crazy train of being upset by all these robberies. He's actually taken up refuge on his roof, and he's put a sign up on the door that says, "We're never open," which is, of course, the opposite of what they usually say, "We're always open." Appu has a shotgun on the roof, and he's actually blasting away at a poor guy who's approaching, probably just trying to buy a pack of cigarettes, if we're being honest. And Appu actually yells out, "Thank you for coming. I'll see you in hell."
You'd think he'd be used to being robbed by now, where it wouldn't be that big of a deal.
For him, it shouldn't be any different operations at all. I wrote that down too. I also wrote down that you definitely could not do this joke today, because this was a pre-Columbine joke, let alone all the other crazy amount of shootings that we've had since that time, unfortunately. But in 1994, all these funny little gun violent jokes are just a glimpse into what might be in the future if somebody doesn't do something about all the crazy people with guns.
That'd be nice to have that addressed. That'd be nice.
You know, yeah, but it's funny that this is literally 5+ years before, the most iconic, or the one that really got the ball rolling, unfortunately. And it's both sad, it's funny in a really dark sort of way, more sad in a lot of ways, but it's just another moment where The Simpsons is really ahead of its time. Like, it always seems to, like, a lot of people say The Simpsons predicts things. Richie and I actually just recently went on a guest spot on the Secret Transmission podcast to talk conspiracy theories about The Simpsons. And for us, we think that it's mostly just a show that's been around that long. It's going to take pop shots at, society, and sometimes they're going to get them right. So that's how that happens. I mean, yes, it's a little bit weird that they got Trump specifically, but honestly, they were thinking like worst case scenario back in, 1998 or whatever that episode came out, 1996, I believe it was. And they just happened to get it right is all it really is. But
or they gave Trump the idea.
that's also possible. Very true. And then, of course, Homer always jumps on the bandwagon when we get into these people on The Simpsons getting into any sort of crazy predicament. So Homer is, of course, all about the security. He's just making some new family rules, like be home before dark, make sure you're not followed, and lock all the doors and the windows.
And don't take candy from strangers.
Marge, they're only human. Lisa doesn't even see why it matters anyway. I mean, she's literally lost all hope. If she doesn't have her saxophone, really, what's the point of even bothering? But Homer is like, Lisa, stop pining over your saxophone. I got you a new instrument.
Lisa's pretty good at this, too.
She picks it up pretty quickly, but it's literally just what I believe is a moonshine jar, because it's labeled XXX. She blows into it at different angles and is able to make at least 2 distinct notes. Lisa is clearly not happy, though, when she's playing this instrument. She does eventually come to a stop, and Homer bells out, Lisa, never, ever stop in the middle of a hoedown.
Which is one of the scenes I've always remembered from this episode. Very fun.
That is a really iconic one.
It's iconic, and also a great callback as well.
Yeah. So Lisa's actually really upset, though. She actually starts to cry, and that's when Homer is kind of like, oh shit, like this really is important. So he vows that he is going to get her saxophone back. He's not sure how, but he'll figure something out. Lisa, music helps Daddy think.
I love his little pacing while he's thinking face.
Yeah, he's kind of scratching his chin and rocking back and forth to Lisa's jugging. I don't know what you call that.
Jugging.
Please don't ever say that again.
Jugging. I think we're going with jugging. Yeah. The crime spree at this point is now completely out of control. We get another newspaper gag where the newspaper swipes across the screen, declaring that the burglar strikes again. And it actually has down below, is nothing safe? Before there's time to answer that, however, the burglar's hand reaches into the screen and steals that newspaper, once again leaving his calling card in its place.
Very Pink Pantherish feel up until this point in the episode.
Yeah, especially with that jazzy music they're giving his kind of theme as well. Things are getting so out of hand that the residents decide they're going to have a meetup of sorts. They meet up in Ned Flanders' dope-ass basement bar, I might mention. He has the coolest bar in Springfield, and it's better than Moe's. I honestly don't know why more people don't hang out there. I guess it's because they'd have to put up with Flanders, yeah.
Did you see what the sign on the wall said, too?
Like, going 7 days without is it's something about not drinking for a week.
7 days without a drink makes me weak.
Yeah, that's it. Nice.
I need that
There's some there's some punning going on there. I see now. Wow. But yeah, Flanders is welcoming them to their home. Welcome, neighbors. Since the police can't seem to get off their dufferoonies to do something about the burglarino, I think it's time we started our own neighborhood watch. A Rooney. Yay! Now, who should lead the group? And a random man jumps up and just says, "You should." So everybody cheers and starts chanting, "Flanders, Flanders, Flanders." I don't really have very much experience, but...
Someone else!
Mo interrupts him and decides anybody would be better if he doesn't have experience. So Homer points out to the cheering crowd, "Hey, I'm someone else."
He's right.
And this is just a great demonstration of the classic Simpsons mob mentality that we often get. Homer comes back. "We don't need a thinker. We need a doer. Someone who'll act without considering the consequences."
Homer, Homer, Homer.
So essentially everybody is like, "You're the man, Homer. We're going to be with you." I think he enlists at this point the sea captain, Skinner, Mo, Appu, Otto, and even
Barney.
Abe. Yeah, Barney, that's true. Even Abe jumps in.
"I'll join. I'm filled with piss and vinegar. At first I was just filled with vinegar."
"Sorry, Dad. You're too old."
Too old? Well, that just means I have experience. Who chased the Irish out of Springfield Village and not four? Me, that's who.
"And a fine job you did, too."
With apologies to all of us Irish people.
Hey, we know they never get offended by anything.
Yeah, that sequence of deciding who's going to be the neighborhood watch lead is one of the strongest in the episode, and just the timing is just expert, from it being suggested to Flanders running it to someone else to Homer doing it, and like you said, the stupid mob mentality bit. It just, like so many animated shows would borrow from that, and I think South Park does it really effectively because they intentionally dumb it down. And almost in every episode of South Park, the townspeople get pissed off about something, and they literally just say "rabble, rabble, rabble."
Yeah.
There's
I do
no
that all the
point
time.
in
Rabble, rabble, rabble.
making it coherent, because the point is just mob mentality. And it's just, obviously everyone knows that The Simpsons were borrowed from heavily and inspired so many shows, but, it was just cool to see them like, yeah, the mob mentality thing really was born out of The Simpsons.
Yeah, there's that classic image. It's from the movie, but it gets used all the time, of the townspeople literally going down the road with, burning torches and rakes and stuff like that. And it starts early. That spirit of the town starts early on in the show.
Mm-hmm.
This is actually, I don't have a whole lot to say from the director's commentary of this episode, to be honest. There wasn't a ton of information, but there was something that got discussed during this point that absolutely just was one of the funniest things I heard, even throughout the entire episode itself. David Mirkin, who I've mentioned many times, has a very dry, dark sense of humor. He essentially pointed out that this scene was inspired by the fact that it seems like when people are given a choice, they always somehow manage to pick the worst possible option for a leader. This commentary was done in 2004, and he was directly making a jab at George Bush, our president at the time. However, he went on to say, because Matt Groening pointed out that, this will be dated by when people are listening to this. And he's like, no, the beauty of that joke is it works no matter who's in charge. And I just thought that was so brilliant for our world today. I had to pause and laugh because I was laughing so hard I couldn't focus on what they went on to continue to say at that point. And frankly, it would have been fine if I didn't, because again, this was really the gem from the commentary. But oh my goodness, just such a funny moment from Dave Mirkin. And again, that guy, I'm really enjoying his spin as a showrunner on The Simpsons so far. It's only been a few episodes, but they've all been really, really good. Excited to see where it goes from here.
What a prophet that guy was, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
But just think, the joke that he made at that time, he didn't think it could get any worse. So just imagine how much worse it could get from now.
That's
true. If we listen to this podcast 10 years from now, what are we going to be saying?
Oh, that's interesting. I hope somebody's
for
listening to this
alive.
podcast in 10 years. Yeah.
The internet and electricity are still around.
That's true. We just lost net neutrality. You might have to, it won't be our fault, but you might have to pay for this show soon. Unfortunately. You're in, Danny's in Canada, so they've already had to deal with that for years, I understand. Some of my Canadian friends are just saying that we're just going to end up having what you guys essentially have. High rates.
It's expensive.
That's what I've heard. But back to David Mirkin, we get one more very dark David Mirkin joke before the end of the first act. Homer ends up in charge of the neighborhood watch, and he actually has his, I guess, posse now over. They're all handling shotguns, and Marge is a little bit concerned about that because she
looking down the barrel of the shotgun.
Yeah, that's true. They're not handling them well. They're handling them poorly. It's Homer, Skinner, Moe, and the sea captain, and they all have their shotguns. Like Richie mentioned, I think they're looking down the barrels to see if they're loaded. Marge is saying how this seems like a bad idea, but Homer starts to explain that they're adults. They can handle firearms. Only his argument is a little bit hurt by the fact that during this speech, everyone keeps misfiring their weapon. Moe fires one through the door, and then it goes around. Everyone's just like, sorry, oops, sorry, bang, sorry, oops. Moe actually shoots another hole through the door and goes, oops, me again.
And if that wasn't the funniest reveal, Moe shooting twice, of course, the end shot. The last shot, of course, is Bart with a loaded shotgun has shot a hole through the wall, and we don't even know that he's there until the very end. So
and he even says sorry.
Best gags of the whole thing. Hilarious bit.
Was absolutely great, and that was one that they had to fight hard with the censors on. They said that they were not happy when they saw a 10-year-old firing a weapon, and that's part of the reason that we get such a quick cutaway right there, because essentially they decided that as long as you cut from it quickly, it'll be okay, I guess, is how it was compromised. But that's actually how the
serious. Bart actually shot it, and he meant to shoot it. He didn't accidentally shoot it. I think Bart had better control over it than everyone else, and he just wanted to pull the trigger. He figured that was the only time he could get away with it. So,
and also against Homer's argument, he wasn't an adult; he was a child. So yeah, he was just being mischievous.
Yeah,
that actually sends us to commercial break in the end of Act 1. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick break ourselves, but we will be right back.
Hey, this is the theif, host of the Gravity Beard Podcast, a variety show with interviews and discussions on a wide range of topics. Our guests have included a viral YouTube star, a former child actor. We've even had a guy on who may have solved the D.B. Cooper case. It's a delicious box of audio chocolate. You never know what you'll get. Find it on Podbean, iTunes, and other places you listen to podcasts. It's the Gravity Beard Podcast. It's what your ears will want to be listening to.
Greetings, friend. Do you wish to look as happy as me? Well, you've got the power inside you right now, so use it and send $1 to Best Darn Diddly. You can find us on patreon.com or donate to us directly on PayPal at bestdarndiddly@gmail.com. Don't delay. Eternal happiness is just $1 away.
$1 for eternal happiness and to support one of my favorite podcasts. I'd be happier with $1.
We get back from the commercial break, and the Vigilante group is now gotten some of the most important part of their meeting out of way. They've established a secret handshake, which is super complicated. You have to be bent over back to back, reaching between your legs. But hey, at least they won't get that confused with anybody else's secret handshake, right? Now all they need is code name. So Homer points out, he says, I'll be Cue Ball, Skinner can be 8 Ball, Barney, you can be 12 Ball, and Moe, you can be Cue Ball.
You're an idiot.
I love that. They also go to Herman's to get supplies, which is fucking terrifying, because we all know what is in Herman's shop for sale. And Herman somehow confuses them with being a wedding party, but Homer tells them, no, they're just forming a vigilante group.
Meet me in the back.
We get a great movie reference here, because what Homer Because what Herman has to show Homer in the back is actually a miniature version of the A-bomb that the government built in the 50s to drop on the beatniks. And we get this great flashback sequence where you got some hippies in the park, and they're like saying poems and doing the snapping thing that you do. And we see Homer flying in an airplane overhead. Put this in your pipe and smoke it. And he pushes the drop the bomb button.
Isn't the bomb called like the Daddy-O too or something?
The Big Daddy-O, yeah. This is a great movie reference here. We get another reference from Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, which of course was the title of last week's episode, was a parody of that as well.
Yeah.
So clearly somebody's a fan. But in this case, Homer has to stomp on the bomb, and he actually ends up dislodging it himself, but then writing it down as it falls onto the hippies.
Yeah, that was a great, and it was my introduction to, like, that was, that to me wasn't a movie reference the first time I saw it.
I got you. Yeah,
which
same
is
here.
a culprit of a lot of things Simpsons, when you watch from an early age, you aren't going to recognize the references, but only later if you're a cinephile and you go back, or you're watching these films for the first time later. There's so many movies that I know as familiar beat for beat because they were parodied so effectively in The Simpsons. And I think a lot of people had that our age as well.
I completely agree. There's times that Richie and I have talked about where we'd be going through school and you'd come across a story that you recognized only because you'd seen the Simpsons episode, but had no real idea that that was already a popular story. That was just, that was just a Simpsons episode. Who would have thought?
I learned Frank Lloyd Wright built skyscrapers because of Marge's hair in a song.
Oh, there you go. So Homer now has his troops completely outfitted. They're actually all wearing very not matching, but their own individual military garb, except for Barney, who's wearing like a Bolorama uniform, I believe. But Homer has his men ready to go, and he's basically like, all right, man, it's time to clean up this town. Skinner wants to know what that actually means, and Homer's like, push people around, make ourselves feel big. We get another great sequence right after that where Homer actually jumps into a sidecar of a motorcycle with Barney. He calls out to Bart that he needs to borrow his megaphone, but Bart warns him that's not a megaphone, that's a Rapmaster 2000, which in 1994, everything that was cool had 2000 written on it.
Yeah, absolutely. You didn't think about how in 6 years that would be stupid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now they're vintage. So we get this great sequence where Homer is going down the street using the megaphone that actually spits out a beat while he's talking, telling people to go back to their homes and offices. But all of the youth are just like, it's Hammer! And they start dancing down the street.
It's Hammer!
And it almost turns into more of a parade, the opposite of what Homer was trying to achieve.
God, I love how they mistake Homer for MC Hammer.
Yeah.
That is so great.
I guess, to be fair, this was pre-internet, so if you've only ever heard Hammer on the radio, you don't know that he's not like a mid-30s bald
36.
fat man. Yeah. I can't remember his 36 or
36 years ago.
That's
36
right.
years ago, a woman gave birth to Homer J. Simpson.
That's right, it's later on. I forgot about that. And essentially after this, the Vigilantes are now just turning into a group of bullies. They're not really helping anyone, they're just harassing people. They find a guy on the street playing a saxophone, so Homer assumes it must be his daughter's. He asks him, where did you buy that? Bought it at Sears. Let's get him!
Great, weird, funny moment.
Yeah, just a kind of, obscure humor. Not really, it doesn't really make any sense, but it's still funny. And there is
Have you been to Sears before?
I've been to Sears. I don't think they exist anymore, but if they do, they're few and far between. But I do love that there's a little Alberto tag on the walkway as the guy runs away. Always good to see Alberto. Yeah.
I didn't notice that.
It's very brief, and there's no image. It literally just says Alberto right on the edge of the wall. My favorite one is actually the next one, because they go up to a guy who's burning some leaves in his backyard, and they immediately basically call out that he's not allowed to do that without a permit. and they start stomping the leaves so they spread everywhere, catching various parts of his yard and even his garage on fire. And the worst part is, of course, the guy yells out, "I do have a permit!" Too late! And then finally, Jimbo is tagging on an alleyway somewhere, and they come up and say, "You better have a good reason for this."
Makes me feel like a big man.
Let me check the list and see if that's on there. Yep, that checks out. Jimbo's actually already heard of the Vigilante group, and he's like, "Hey, you are those drunk guys who roam around the neighborhood. Can I join you?"
Can you swing a sack of doorknobs?
Can I? I love how they tell him that they'll give him a sack,
your own doorknobs.
but they have to provide his own doorknobs.
And there's a callback to that joke later in the episode, too.
Oh, great callback. Yeah, absolutely. No! For now, though, at the Simpsons dinner table, Homer is bragging to Marge and Lisa that the group's doing really well. So I said to him, "Look, buddy, your car was upside down when we got here. And as for your grandma, she shouldn't have mouthed off like that."
Dad, don't you see you're abusing your power like all vigilantes? I mean, if you're the police, who will police the police?
I don't know. Coast Guard?
Good answer, Homer. Always full of wisdom.
Great answer.
So Marge and Lisa point out that the group was originally started so they could stop that burglar and get Lisa's sax back, but Homer's not having it. "Lisa, the mob's working on getting your saxophone back, but we've also expanded into other important areas. Literacy programs, preserving our beloved covered bridges, world domination."
World domination?
Oh, that one might be a typo.
Mental note, the girl knows too much.
Is he gonna take out his daughter? Is that what's happening?
Great Homer brain moment.
Those are our favorite parts of the show so far, is Homer talking to his brain. We always say it's a shame they don't do that as much anymore, but many times on the commentary they pointed out that it's because they dipped heavily into that well long ago in these early seasons.
Well, it's at least we have cherished memories of it, and it wasn't, driven completely into a brick wall.
True. It's still funny anytime we see it, so what that's worth. As well as Homer, the network, as well as the dinner table, we also see on the TV that the network hasn't learned its lesson when it comes to having Homer on as a guest, because they decide to have him on Smartline again, where he is actually representing his vigilante group.
Mr. Simpson, how do you respond to the charges that petty vandalism such as graffiti is down 80%, while heavy sack beatings are up a shocking 900%?
People can come up with statistics to prove anything, Kent. 40% of all people know that.
I see. What do you say to the accusation that your group has been causing more crimes than it's been preventing?
Oh, Kent, I'd be lying if I said my men weren't committing crimes.
Well, touché.
End of statement.
What
That's
else
how
are you
kill
going
an
to reply
interview
to
right
that? This was actually Homer's best appearance on the show so far, to be fair. He hasn't made an ass of himself. He actually presented himself pretty well with those. Knowing his numbers is important. I know that from watching Shark Tank. We also see Smartline gets a guest viewer call-in, which is strange because it's not a call-in show. But we hear the man at the other end of the line start talking to Homer as if they're old acquaintances. And he refers to him as his arch nemesis, but Homer seems completely oblivious to this. He's just like, "Hello, you do know who this is, don't you?"
Bart?
He's like, "I don't know, Marge?" The man explains that he isn't Homer's wife, but he does enjoy her pearls. And that's finally when Homer gets it. And he starts to get angry, scream, and curse about how he's going to get them. And, "Oh, you've got my daughter's saxophone." And he actually, in frustration, starts choking somebody off screen that we can't see.
Homer, that's our stage manager.
Oh, sorry. I'm a little nervous. That's a good reason to strangle somebody, right?
Yeah, being on TV. It's weird, right?
Right. So the burglar announces his next target's going to be the Springfield Museum, where he's going to be going after the world's largest cubic zirconia, which Homer vows to not sleep so that he can protect that day and night. He actually says, as he's doing his vow, he's like, I'll be there day and night, unless you want to goad me a little bit more by maybe giving me an approximate time. He doesn't get a response, so he just cuts in and says, we'll be right back.
Hey, I get to say that.
It's very defensive of his throwaways. Immediately, we cut to Homer and his crew guarding the museum, and his numbers do keep growing because Abe and Jasper actually show up. Abe and Jasper actually show up and want to help.
That name right.
That's their celebrity couple name. Homer tells them the best way they can help is just by setting a good example, so they should stand around and not steal anything.
And they immediately disregard that.
As soon as Homer turns back around, they're like, we're on break.
And they're stealing like a piece of art.
Yeah, they sure are. Again, the second time or third time we've gotten a Dragnet reference in the last few episodes because there's just a really quick scene between Homer and Skinner. Essentially, he's like, well, how do you know he's going to show up? He's a criminal. Oh, good.
Mm-hmm.
And then they play the Dragnet theme. Yeah. But that really, honestly, I was never a Dragnet guy, but I did watch it a couple times because it would come on Nick at Night when I'd be watching it with whatever. But that music hits, and it really does remind you of the sequence with the cops talking to each other. Homer's more determined than ever to get this criminal. He is on his post, and then he starts to kind of give himself a little bit of a motivational speech.
Well, Mr. Cat Burglar, you'd like to get in here, wouldn't you? There's just one little problem. 36 years ago, some lady gave birth to a man named Homer J. Simpson. Oh my God, underage kids drinking beer without a permit!
Actually, I really like that he did there's some lady gave birth to, because that'll come into play in a later episode with some Mama Homer, yeah.
As opposed to some guy?
Well, yeah, exactly. You know what I meant. I love that as soon as Homer takes off to bust these kids, or at least that's what we assume he's doing, as it won't be, as we find out later. But the thief immediately drops down on a rope and enters the building. He's able to steal the zirconia and get away, and we see that Homer was distracted, showing off how much he could drink to those underage children.
And I gotta say, there's something about, I noticed in Simpsons episodes, and this one really drove it home too, that watching Homer chug beer, or people drink beer in the show, makes me want to have a beer. And I there's something about it that makes it look delicious.
They do. They animate it very well. Yeah, I do want a duff for me and a duff for you. I love that they do yet another newspaper gag. This one's kind of funny in a few ways. First of all, they have Zirconia Stolen with a Z on that.
That's my favorite of the newspaper gags, yes. With the Stolen.
The paper also accuses Homer of being asleep at the switch, which, of course, Homer is not having that.
Asleep at the switch? I wasn't asleep, I was drunk.
I believe you, Dad. Homer tries to get back on patrol, but apparently the town has turned on him because they really, really love that zirconia. As soon as he opens up the door, he gets pelted with fruit by yet another angry mob. Maybe worse, though, that callback joke that Richie was talking about earlier, because Jimbo Jones comes up to Homer at the front door, and he dumps his sack of doorknobs on top of Homer.
You let me down, man. Now I don't believe in nothing no more. I'm going to law school.
No! Lisa tries to pitch in here and cheer up her father by playing those jugs, or by jugging, excuse me. But even that doesn't work anymore. But I didn't say stop.
And that's just the bow of the callbacks. That's so great. I didn't say stop.
And that actually depressed moment with Homer slouched on the ground, covered in fruit and frowning despite his daughter playing music for him, cuts us to the end of Act 2, which I do want to make a quick note on the pacing on this one real quick, because this structurally is much, much different than a lot of the episodes that we've been reviewing recently, where the acts are relatively balanced. This first act, or the first act, lasted for almost 10 minutes. And this middle act was actually very, very short. It was actually less than 5 minutes. So it was a very big discrepancy in the timestamps on these. Whereas in the past, they usually have that structure where the first third of the episode is almost unrelated, and then it builds into the main story in Act 2. This one, in a lot of ways, was backwards, where the last act almost seems a little bit separated from the rest of the story in some ways. It just switches to a different movie reference is really what it is.
Yeah, that's right.
But for now... go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, the writing is always, regardless of how they structure certain episodes, you know, they really just leave you on, you know, really classic story beats. You know, we've got, you know, the call to action and what Homer's going to do, leaving us at our first commercial break. And then in this one, seeing the hero at his worst and you know, can't go much lower from here. And so, you know, it's just, they just know story structure so well, that however they play around with it, it's like a masterclass, all these episodes.
It really does work. And it doesn't matter how they present it. They are able, I think you're absolutely right. It's just, they're such master storytellers that they can rearrange the story to keep it fresh and to not get that same repetitive thing going week to week, so that we stay invested in each story, or in each character's story, from week to week.
And you can see how it might happen with the entire townsfolk getting robbed. You know, you've got to have your story structure, but then you need your jokes as well. And the first act is just so ripe for comedy that you just got to imagine they were just trying to cram in as many. Like, there's tons of cutaways before that first commercial break, and you know, we have two great Chief Wiggum moments, a Professor Frink moment. We get, you know, everyone getting robbed, some good stuff with Skinner and Barney, like we talked about. There's just tons to pack in there. So I think it's, you know, they do have their story structure down, but they realize that the show is a comedy. So if something's got to give, it's going to be consistency in its structure, while it's always good to make room for, you know, where all the laughs are going to be.
Good point. Especially with this structure, because especially with this writer, because John Swartzwelder is often considered one of the greatest writers on The Simpsons of all time, and he's actually a very fascinating person. We've only talked a little bit about him because he leads a very, very private life, but my goodness, does he write some funny-ass episodes of The Simpsons.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, we'll go ahead and take a quick break to end Act 2, and we'll be back with the final act of this episode in just a few minutes.
Rising from the depths of a state called Michigan, two inebriated dorks prepare their plan for intergalactic domination. Mixing their extensive knowledge of geek culture with their insatiable thirst for alcohol, these two man-children bring you a show like you've never heard before. They will tell you tales from faraway lands and have you questioning their taste in beer. But make no mistake, friend, for the best coverage of your favorite comics, films, and TV shows, there's no better source for you to get your fix. So listen up, strap in, and prepare yourself as Jake and Tom conquer the world.
Hey guys, it's Richie the WizKid here from the Best Darn Diddly Review Show, and I'm here to talk to you about PopThreads.com, your number one source for finding awesome nerdy t-shirts. Are you sick from not knowing what to wear when you go out with all your friends on the weekends? Well, don't have a cow, man. Go to PopThreads.com, and if you use the code Simpsons at checkout, you can save 15% on all your t-shirt needs.
So we're back in the Simpsons home, and Abe actually shows up for the rescue of Homer. Everybody is down in the dumps. Homer is now inside, but still, essentially being assaulted by a mob. Abe comes busting through the door. He's also covered in fruit, but it's not because he got pelted by the mob. He just fell down at the big boy again. It's just funny, but
good old grandpa.
They make a lot of jokes at the elderly's expense in this episode. Like old people don't matter, and a lot at Abe specifically. But it's borderline mean. But again, they do it just right, so it's the right amount of mean to funny ratio.
Yeah, the elderly get it. Everyone says that Simpsons is an equal opportunity offender, but I think the elderly might get it a little stiffer than the rest. I think you might be onto something.
Oh, well, easy come, easy go.
Yeah. Abe comes in. He's all excited. Well. Before, I jumped ahead there. First, he says,
You jumped the shark a little bit. Yeah.
First, Abe claims that he actually knows who the burglar is, and he starts to try to gloat a little bit, hold it over Homer's head just a little bit. Well. Before I was just too old, and no one wanted my help. Suddenly, look who comes to old Grandpa. But the family just starts to walk away. They do not give a crap about what he's saying at all. So he's like, wait, where are you going? Oh, come back, I'll tell you.
He's so heartbroken when he says that too.
So Abe does tell them that he figured out that the burglar's name is Malloy, and he actually lives in the retirement center. He explains that he figured it out on his frequent trips to the ground. And an amazing Abe line is coming up. I'm sure you're going to get to it with the sneakers. With all of the... he actually falls to the ground and he says, I noticed Malloy wore sneakers for sneaking. For sneaking. Love that. My next clue came yesterday at the museum. We felt slighted by your age bashing and started home. Malloy said, I'll catch up with you. And then we see a flashback where Malloy actually shoots up a rope up on the building, and then he's walking up the side of the building vertically, just like Batman did, or Batman and Robin did in the old Batman. Adam West Batman. And Grandpa goes on and says, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. There was something strange about the way he walked. Much more vertical than usual. And then the biggest clue, though, of course, is finally, Malloy, unlike most retired people, has the world's largest cubic zirconia sitting on his coffee table.
Oh, Dad, I could kiss you.
Well, kiss me right here. It's the only part that still has feelings. It's the random spot on his skull, for what it's worth. I love that, though, this mastermind criminal, and he just leaves the zirconia laying as a coffee table, conversation starter. He was probably having one of the single old ladies over the night before, man. And he was trying to impress her.
Well, he wants to get caught. That's why he left the handkerchief earlier in the episode that Wiggum found. The part of his ploy is to get put in prison so he can escape. He gets off on that stuff, man.
I guess so.
When you're a thief for that long, you just kind of want to see what it feels like to be caught.
I guess so. That's an interesting way to look at it. I mean, I've heard people claim that they'll do stuff like that, or at least there's, I don't know if it's actually fiction or real life serial killers who have done stuff where they start essentially toying with the police because it gives them some sort of rush. That was probably just 7 that I'm thinking of.
Just 7.
Great movie. I love, though, Homer essentially announces to the mob, I know where it's at, I know where the thief is, and he takes them all to the retirement center, and sure enough, sitting right on Malloy's table is that giant zirconia, and Mo has a great response here.
What an eyesore.
So, Mr. Malloy, it seems that the cat has been caught by the very person who is trying to catch him.
How ironic.
How ironic. That is too good.
Where's Bender when you need him? That's not ironic. That's just coincidental.
Oh, so this is what I was talking about earlier, where this guy's caught, but he's so charming that as he starts to give everything back and apologizing to the townspeople, he actually gets the townspeople on his side, and they're like, we don't want to lock him up, let him go free.
Sorry, folks. Gee, I really hate to spoil this little love-in, but Mr. Malloy broke the law, and when you break the law, you gotta go to jail.
That reminds me, or here's your monthly kickback.
You couldn't have picked a worse time.
Man, Wiggum owns this episode, huh?
Wiggum is the best.
Yeah, he does. He really does.
Best line is still ahead of him.
Yeah, that's right, with only a little bit left.
Just yet.
Because that right there could actually seem like it was the Simpsons reset we're looking for, because all the townspeople get their possessions returned, the criminals behind bars, so really, you could say that this is the end of the episode and everything would have been restored, only there's still the majority of the third act left, so we've still got quite
We
a
need
bit
another
of
movie
papers to
reference.
go. We really do. I think that's what's been missing. So Homer's gloating once again, this time, bragging that he's put Malloy in jail, but Malloy kind of points out that he does have millions of dollars stashed away. He could tell him where it's at. At first, Homer's just like, shut up! But Wiggum, once again, is like, wait, maybe we should hear him out on this.
Homer's stupidity almost saved them.
That's true. It almost saved them from this big coup that they are about to be sent on. Malloy explains that the money is buried right here in Springfield under a giant T. And Homer and Wiggum are great here because they both start slowly exiting and they're like, I'm gonna go home and sleep now. Yeah, me too. I'm also going to sleep. So then we see Eddie, Lou, Wiggum, and Homer running out of the jail frantically. In classic Homer style again, Homer's the best here because he's screaming and causing more of a panic than he should. There's millions of dollars buried under a giant T! And he's actually causing more people to get all worked up and start chasing down this money. Unfortunately, though, for the people of Springfield, apparently Springfield really, really loves the letter T because it seems a lot of their buildings and a lot of their landmarks happen to be shaped that way. Let's see, there's the Big T building, Big T burgers and fries, the Big T factory, which was just a
that was
tea
my
factory
favorite
that was
one.
Really big.
Yeah, that was my favorite one.
Is that a cup
clever.
of tea, that one?
Yeah.
That's
Big
fine.
T Big T Theater featuring Ice-T and WWE Hall of Famer Booker T. For those wrestling fans out there, that's the connection to the episode, brother.
Was he the part of some major soap opera or something?
I honestly don't know if that was even the same one, but in my mind, it sure as hell is.
5 times.
5 times, 5 times, 5 times, 5 times, 5 times. Sorry, I had to. You made me.
Beat him up. That's really my fault.
They all rush to the jail, and Wiggum tells them they need more information because they were not able to figure this out on their own.
This is my favorite Sam Neill line delivery. Possibly my favorite line delivery in the whole episode is him giving them instructions on how to get there.
Well, he's so, at first it's like he's frustrated that he's he gives them the complete address and they just look at him blankly. So he start okay, you need to take a right on Lamar and then a left there, and he gives them step-by-step
He gives them Google Maps directions on how to get
Yeah.
Google Maps before Google Maps existed. Simpsons did
He
it
could just
again.
tell how dumb they are. They're not listening. Then you want to take a left. A left. Love that.
That is really good. And at this point, this episode does shift into a complete parody of the movie It's a Mad, 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 Mad World from 1963, which David Mirkin on the commentary claims is one of his favorite movies. A movie that I really liked when I was younger. I haven't seen it recently, so I don't know if it holds up, but I loved the movie Rat Race when I was younger, and that is not considered a remake of Mad, 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 Mad World, but it is very, very heavily influenced. Yeah, it's almost the exact same story. It's essentially a bunch of people going crazy over a hidden fortune. In this case, this is almost exactly what happens in the movie, where the criminal tells the townspeople that there's a treasure hidden. And while they're all distracted out looking for this treasure, in this case, they actually dig down and they find a briefcase, only when they open it up, it just has a piece of paper in it. Another great Homer line right there, though, is it's mine! And he grabs it really quickly out of their hands. Frightfully sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I like the other scene that we skipped over where it has Kent Brockman and the professor talking again.
Oh yeah, another callback.
About evacuating the town for some unknown reason. Yeah.
The gooey
it's time to crack open people's skulls and feast on the gooey insides. And the professor's like, yes, I would say that,
Kent. Yeah. They've set everybody into a literal race. And actually, there's another scene, too, where we see a man driving in a convertible, and he's trying to cross a creek. Bart's over on the shoreline laughing, and the guy's yelling out, like, "Why did you tell me this was a shallow creek, kid?" As he's sinking into the water. That is actually another direct reference to the Mad, 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 Mad World, because that was drawn to look like Phil Silvers, who is actually a comedic actor. He actually had his own sitcom in the 1950s, and then he had a role in the movie Mad, 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 Mad World, where his character had a similar fate. So that was, again, a visual reference to the movie that was a lot of fun. When they do actually get the paper, though, it reads, "Frightfully sorry, but there is no hidden treasure. I've already used this time to escape from your jail. Fondest wishes." Homer says he can't quite make out the signature, though, so Quimby yells out, "Keep digging, we're bound to find something." Not even listening.
The part I like about through all this, Marge is one of the people going crazy, running around looking for stuff, and Marge is one of the people digging, too. So, like, even she got swept up in all this.
It's like when the Powerball hit 1.5 billion, even the most rational people were going goddamn bananas over that shit.
Like us, we did.
Oh, we did. Oh, yeah.
You gotta like when Marge gets in on this insanity, too, from time to time.
It's fun when she lets loose a little bit and she isn't a stick in the mud, because unfortunately her character is often depicted that way.
And her and Homer in the sidecar together is a great image.
Yeah, that really is. It's even better than Barney and Homer, honestly. Marge is so determined when she's driving, too.
Oh, that was Hammer, okay?
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
That's right.
We get one more last great joke here at the end of the episode, because they did as Quimby suggested, and they kept digging a long time, it would seem, because they're like, 50 feet down in the ground at this point? And that's when they're like, I don't think we're actually going to find anything. How are we going to get out of here?
I know. We'll dig our way out.
We hear all this labored digging noises, and then finally, at the very last line of the episode, one of the funniest as well on this one, Wiggum proudly declares, "No, dig up, stupid!"
Which I assume is what all of our favorite line of the episode was.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
that killed me the first time I heard that. That killed me. And it never got unfunny. That is so fucking funny.
Oh, again, great episode. Completely different pace from the rest of the season so far, but a lot of fun.
Zanier.
Yeah, it does bring us to the end of the episode. Danny, was there anything else that you wanted to bring up before we get out of here?
I think we really covered it. And I would just like to say thanks for having me on the show. It was so fun to dissect one of these classic episodes. I try not to run Simpsons rewatches into the ground. I'm like a Seinfeld freak, and South Park I'll revisit often. Old Saturday Night Lives, but Simpsons I consciously make a decision not to overwatch these specific seasons, so that they'll never sort of lose their luster. And it was really cool to go down memory lane with you fellas.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, man. This was an absolute pleasure. We had a lot of fun chatting with you, both about The Simpsons and about your movie Heel Kick that's going to be coming out this Friday, January 19th. You can get that at heelkickmovie.com. Really looking forward to seeing that. And again, we do appreciate you spending so much time with us here today. We would love to have you back on in the future if you wanted to come dissect some more with us down the road. We've still got a lot of really great episodes ahead of us.
Sounds like a plan. Let's do it.
Awesome. Richie, before we're out of here, anything you or that book want to say?
We didn't talk about the one thing I wanted to laugh at, the gift shop thing on the museum. On the outside of the museum, like in stone, it's got little asterisks at the top under the Natural History Museum or whatever the museum was called, saying Truth, Knowledge, Gift Shop. So I thought that was funny. This episode holds up very well. It was very funny. Sam Neill was great. Everything about this episode was great. So many iconic moments, and I forgot about all the Wiggum stuff in this. And again, when Wiggum was kind of in the spotlight for a moment, like you said earlier, Danny, he totally stole the show.
Mm-hmm. I don't know why he was gifted all those good lines that, and great sequences, but yeah, really, this is his episode in terms of comedic beats.
Very cool. I've mentioned it a couple times that I felt like this, the pacing on this one was just structurally different. And in a lot of ways throughout the episode, I wrote down a few spots that I meant to bring up in the moment and didn't. But there was a few places where this episode reminded me more of a season 1 episode. And I don't mean that as a downgrade. I just mean that the structure of it was more similar, especially, I felt there was a lot of similarities to Bart the General from season 1, which was actually one of my favorite episodes from that season. I feel like they almost took that season 1 style that they had a little bit more, just the way that the episode was laid out that way, but they've learned from the 4 seasons they've now had since then, and they've made a better version of it in a lot of ways, because I do think this episode was better than Bart the General. But again, it does somewhat remind me of that in a lot of ways, just the old school style of The Simpsons. And Swartzwelder has been around since the beginning, I do believe, so that would make sense.
Look at you, making change.
Making change. But that will do it for this week's Best Darn Diddly Review Show. Thank you again so much for tuning in and listening. We always appreciate when you do. Danny, real quick, go ahead and tell everybody where they can find you online.
You can check out everything about my film at Heel Kick Movie on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And myself personally, you can find me at _Danny Mac on Twitter.
Awesome. Richie, what about yourself, sir?
You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at theWiz_Kid23. Also, while you're on Twitter, go ahead and give our show a follow as well. That's at Best Darn Diddly. That's DIDDLY.
And I am at MrMostDaysOff. That works just about everywhere. Thank you again for listening to the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. Richie the WizKid and I look forward to being back with you again next week to review the episode Bart Gets Famous.
And remember, never stop in the middle of a hoedown.
Until next time, be cromulent to each other.
Are you afraid of what goes bump in the night?
Have you or your friends ever pondered a conspiracy?
Do you want to know more about the unknown?
If so, then put on your tinfoil hat, sit down, and pick up your computer, tablet, or phone. Go to iTunes or YouTube and search for Secret Transmission Podcast and listen to us try to explain the unexplainable.
Follow us on Twitter for updates on shows.
At Secret Trans Pod. That's SecretTranspod.
Or you can email us suggestions
at secrettransmission@hotmail.com. That's SecretTransmission@hotmail.com.